And on CSI, there is no distinction made between historical science and observational science. Natural laws that applied in the past apply now.
This guy misses the point. What is the difference between operational science and historical science? Operational science focuses on now. It answers the question, what happens, and is observational, repeatable and falsifiable, meaning it can be either true or false. Historical science tries to make sense out of historical events, trying to find out what happened in the past. Historical science gathers evidence, interprets that, and it's only partially falsifiable. It can be either plausible or false. So we can only test to see if something could theoretically have happened, but there's no absolute guarantee it did happen that way. Operational science is all about defining natural laws. Historical science is about finding the only one truth. That makes operational science applicable for inventions, while historical science is not. Let's illustrate that by this broken bottle. Operational science can drop bottles to test gravity. It can smash bottles to find out what happens and define laws about the strength of the glass. And we can test things like what role the glass thickness plays in this. Historical science focuses on this particular bottle. We found it and we can interpret it to answer questions like, what happened? How does this happen? And why? Did it break by dropping or by smashing? And we can take fingerprints in the hope to find out who broke it. A good example of operational science is the periodic table. We can apply everything that is in it and use it and watch it over and over again. An example of historical science is forensic science. We can find evidence and interpret it, but we cannot really repeat it, nor observe what happened. When it comes to evolution, it has both an operational component and a historical component. We can define natural laws about evolution that occurs today, which is part of biology. But the majority of evolutionary theory is interpreted from evidence within paleontology. The part that describes Darwinian evolution is all in the realm of historical science. We cannot repeat it, nor observe what happened. That is the difference between operational science and historical science. So it has nothing to do with natural laws changing over time whatsoever. Now let's play a little game. Which of these are closely related? You didn't really think these were closely related, did you? You did? Oh, come on, you're such a creationist. Look, before you can tell if creatures are closely related, you must first know a lot more about them. You see, these have more than 150 million years between the fossil and the living creature. So even if they would be related, it is very remotely at most. Look. All of these have millions of years between them, so they are not closely related. Or are they? Could it be that they are not really that old? Sorry. Or did they re-evolve after they were gone? Or is this evolutionary stasis, meaning they stayed the same all this time? Let's see what the scientists think. Here. The names are completely different, so they may not be related at all. This phenomenon is called living fossils, fossils that can still be found alive. Now these are Apologetiek and the whale. Of course these are much more closely related. Apologetiek evolved into whales within 15 million years. And of course these are closely related. Everybody knows that. And of course nobody thinks these are related, not even creationists, because this is just a matter of design, even though it is very well possible to make an evolutionary diagram of it. Evolutionary theory is so widely accepted by the scientific community that one could wonder if there is even an alternative possible. Let's see. An alternative to life evolved into existence would be life did not evolve into existence. But there's a problem with that alternative. Take a look at this diagram. The way science works is that we start with pieces of evidence. We combine that to form an interpretation, and this interpretation has some underlying assumptions. And science accepts the interpretation that requires the least and smallest assumptions possible. Based on these interpretations, conclusions can be drawn. Then new evidence is found, which leads to new interpretations and new conclusions. Once the new conclusions match the initial tiny assumptions, there is more confidence for this, and it is starting to become a scientifically established fact. The alternative life did not evolve yields life was created or life was intelligently designed. But what causes the problem with those alternatives is that it has a religious basis. That is the source of the problem. The symptom is that it is not an assumption, but a presupposition. That is a conclusion that is drawn before the scientific research even begins. This results into a bias, and this is what the diagram looks like in this case. It is actually pretty much the same diagram. But what happens when new evidence is presented to this presupposition? Evidence that contradicts the conclusion. Then the evidence is seen as an anomaly. Instead, the whole system should be considered circular reasoning, and only the evidence is supposed to be considered true. So, let's list some more problems with this. Creation and intelligent design, if it would have happened, was a unique event. It is unfalsifiable, unobservable, and unrepeatable. And the worst of all, since it involves supernatural miracles, it violates known physical laws. And that makes it horrible pseudoscience. So because it is unscientific, we eliminate that option and start to do real science like this. Now, of course, the theory of evolution shouldn't cause contradictions of this caliber. Let's find out. How about we assume a nothing? Let's just dive into all the evidence that supports evolutionary theory and show why the theory is so successful. This is the evolutionary timeline. The numbers displayed here represent millions of years. Of course, nobody of us was around throughout most of this time. So this timeline was established with interpretations of evidence. The relative timeline follows from geology and the absolute values follow from radiometric dating. Those two issues reach beyond the scope of this video, so we're not going into much detail about that. Let's assume this timeline for now, so we can list some of the things that will be discussed about evolution. We're going back in time to see apes that became smart, mammals that started to swim, the dinosaur age, and when they got extinct 65 million years ago. We're going back to when dinosaurs started to fly, when fish decided to walk, and when the first complex life evolved. We're also going way further back in time to take a look at the first cells. And we're going to look what must have happened for the first life to form. And in between we're going to discuss some of the processes involved as well. So what is evidence? With so much information available, sometimes it's hard to distinguish fact from interpretation. Take the stegosaurus skeleton for example. This is the real evidence. Next, we can make a drawing of what the stegosaur actually looked like when it was alive. This is called an artist impression. We should not confuse the drawing with evidence. It's probably a good guess, but there's a lot we don't know. This drawing does not add evidence. The skeleton remains the evidence, the drawing is actually fantasy. For example, we don't know what the color of this creature was. It may have been green, or yellow with purple, or grey, or brown, or... Hey, wait, what was that? Back please.
What, this one?
Yes, thank you. What is that?
This is a drawing on an ancient Cambodian temple.
Huh? And that shows a stegosaur? How did those people know what the stegosaur looked like?
Well, it's not entirely sure it's a stegosaur. It could also be an Asian rhino.
But what about the spines on its back?
That may just be coincidental decoration. The head is too large for a stegosaur.
Yes, that's true. But what about the tail? And it doesn't have a horn.
Yeah, you got a point there.
A rhinosaur.
Look, dinosaurs couldn't have lived together with human beings because they got extinct 65 million years ago, so forget about it. And it isn't as clearly a dinosaur as other ancient drawings, such as this one from the 15th century tomb of Bishop Bell in England, or this Mesopotamian cylinder, or this ancient drawing from Peru, so we shouldn't put too much attention to it anyway.
Where were we? Yes, so the point I was making, the skeleton is the real evidence and the artist impression is not. Let's examine a recent fossil transition. We go back to the time that apes started to walk on 2 feet. Everybody knows that chimpanzees are closely related to us. You know, the chimpanzee is that funny ape that differs only 2% with our DNA, even though its genome is 12% longer. In fact, some parts of our genome even differ so much to that of the apes that it's weird that we have it. Some parts are more similar to that of pigs. This caused one scientist to suggest that we are the result of a pig that made it a chimpanzee. But hardly any scientist believes that. No, it's not true that we evolved from chimpanzees. According to scientists, chimpanzees and us evolved from a shared ancestor. This is her. Scientists have named her Lucy. Hi Lucy. Unfortunately, this is an artist's impression. This is the actual evidence. A very close examination shows that the skeleton is a combination of a human and an ape skeleton. We can distinguish the largest part of the skeleton from the leg, and it appears that the leg is like that of a human and the rest is that of an ape. It's rather curious that scientists found this buried together like this. This is strong evidence that humans and chimpanzees evolved from a common ancestor. Well, it would be if the scientists would have found it buried together. They didn't. This is more closely to what they found. There were 200 meters between the leg and the rest of the skeleton, and so this is the actual evidence. Now let's go to the Neanderthal. This is an image of a Neanderthal. It shows that this is a very smart ape. This is strong evidence for evolution. Unfortunately, This is an artist impression. This is the actual evidence, with a note that a complete skeleton of a Neanderthal has never been found. Instead, this is a reconstruction of 4 overlapping skeletons. This is a more recent artist impression, which doesn't show any ape features at all. The right image is what a Neanderthal could have looked like if it would be wearing modern clothing. Based on the skull, both reconstructions are possible, but only the skull is the real evidence. Both others provide no evidence. The same applies for the skeleton. So in order to make our conclusion about how ape-like Neanderthals were, we must base our ideas on more evidence. Let's list the rest of the evidence. Neanderthals made wall paintings. Apes don't do that. They invented spears that had tips glued together to the stick with a very powerful superglue. Apes can't do that. Their average brain size was slightly larger than ours.
They buried their dead.
Apes don't do that. They wore clothing. They made music. But they were less developed than us today. Hooray! Apes are less developed than us today, so finally we got evidence for evolution. Except for that their level of development is identical to that of modern African Bushmen.
And they are human.
Based on the evidence, we can conclude that Neanderthals are fully human. What? Hey, I'm just reading the evidence. Oh, come on!
Let's take a look at whale evolution. Look, this is a transition between a land mammal and a whale. This is what a scientist had drawn based on evidence. That is a powerful argument for evolution. Whale evolution happened about 49 million years ago, but actually this skull is the only evidence on which the whale evolution drawing was based. The parts drawn white here was all that was found. It was named Apologeet. The idea of whale evolution was based on an ear bone. A what? An ear bone. But later a more complete skeleton has been found. And this is also a reconstruction. The parts drawn here are the parts that are already found. Based on this new evidence, another artist impression was made. This isn't very whale-like, is it? Nevertheless, scientists still see this as a whale ancestor, but they just added more steps. This is the evolutionary diagram, and this is considered one of the best preserved fossil transitions available. The next step is Apologeet. This is how it is displayed in a museum. Again, we can easily distinguish evidence from fantasy. Shown like this, it is a mammal that is ready to dive. It's just a matter of display though. The parts marked grey are the parts that were really found. Again, the ear bone was one basis to conclude whale evolution. The ear bone is inside the skull, so it cannot be shown. The whale uses a specific ear bone to hear very low tones. Other scientists conclude that the ear bone of Apologeet and Apologeet does not have the right shape to be useful for that though. Another feature that is considered very whale-like is the cheekbone. It is very thin, like that of a dolphin. Well, actually it isn't, but we can just say it is. The cheekbone of a horse is closer to that of a dolphin. The next step is Rhodoccetus. This is the most important step in whale evolution. This really is the mammal with flippers. So it is the real transition between mammals and whales. Rhodoccetus now takes the position that Apologeet used to have. Unfortunately, this is an artist impression. This
is the real evidence. All the rest is not. The next two, Dorudon and Basilosaurus, were probably just really swimming creatures based on the evidence. That's fine. Basilosaurus has a tiny bone at its rare end, just like modern whales still have today. It's often stated that this is a worthless leg left over, but it is actually a functional anchor that holds organs, and it's gender dependent. And it's not attached to the spine, which legs are. And now for the final step. From this point, Basilosaurus is almost identical to the baleen whale. This is a cladogram, or a tree of life. This shows what is related to what according to evolutionary theory. Let's explain some more about how evolution scientists define these relationships. Here we have three totally different creatures that should have evolved from one shared ancestor. In this diagram we can see how this neatly grows from one simple ancestor into more developed creatures, all with one step at a time, such as legs evolving into wings, squares into triangles, color changes, things like that. In this case it is very clear. But how about this one? Where should we put it? Well, let's see. It's got the wing and the elliptical body of the left creature, its red color of the middle one, the shape of the head of the right one, and the head color too, and its bent legs also from the right one. That's odd. Now it's not clear what the relationship is. To solve puzzles like this, evolution scientists have invented a cladogram. How it works? Count the amount of similarities, and the one that has the most similarities is assumed to be the closest relative. It doesn't matter what you put in the system, it always gives one answer. You can put in skeletons, living creatures, DNA, cars, airplanes, and it always gives one answer. Not because of the evidence, but because of the system. So in this example, the right one has three features similar, and so that is the closest relative. The wings, circular body, and the red color are just due to coincidence or have another reason, such as evolutionary convergence. Of course, similar features that are not due to shared ancestors are very rare. The tree of life is unambiguous, no matter if you base it on physical features or on DNA. Well, no. Actually, more than half the features that are similar is considered not to be due to shared ancestors. For example, the eye evolved from scratch at least 50 times individually. And we see features disappearing and reappearing throughout the cladograms all the time. And this gets quite extreme. Take a bee for example. The bee has a very special way of reproduction. Yes, it takes a male and a female bee to reproduce, but there is only one female in an entire group that reproduces, and that one is called the queen. The ant has a similar way of reproduction. Since they are both insects, their shared ancestor may have had this property too. But there's a third species that's doing it in the same way. That is the naked mole rat. In this case, it is obvious that their shared ancestors did not have this property. Let's take another example. This is the platypus. It has a mammal fur and gives mammal milk to its babies, so that suggests it's a mammal. It even has a beaver tail. But it has a beak like a duck. It lays reptile-like eggs, and the male has a reptile poison. So what is it? And what were its ancestors? This doesn't make sense, so it might help to take a look at its DNA. Most animals have an X and a Y chromosome for a male and an XX for a female. This is called the sex chromosome pair, as these define the gender of the creature. For the platypus, the X chromosome is a lot like that of a mouse. But the strange thing about the platypus is that it has a second sex chromosome pair. The X chromosome of that second pair is very similar to ours. To make it even stranger, the platypus has a third sex chromosome pair, of which the X is similar to that of birds, even though that is called a Z chromosome. The platypus even has a total of 5 sex chromosome pairs. How did that happen? And how did one of these get similar to that of mice, another to humans, and another to birds? How did that evolve? Let's take a look at bird evolution. Here comes the fossil transition from dinosaurs to bird. Yes, that's a bird. That's a bird. Yes, that's a bird. Bird. And this is the evidence. Okay, and why is this a fossil transition?
Well, it's a very special bird. It has claws and teeth, and it's the oldest bird in the fossil record.
So it was in between a bird and a not bird?
Yes, birds later lost their claws and their teeth.
Lost. So Archaeopteryx was a bird with extra things. I was expecting something that was gaining bird feathers, a transition, not a complete bird with extra gadgets. And yes, it's interesting that this bird has claws, but so does this one, which is still alive. This is an Archaeopteryx feather. It's a fully formed, flight-enabling, asymmetrical feather, just like modern birds have. Archaeopteryx isn't in between dinosaurs and birds. It's just a bird. It was found in a Jurassic layer. Okay, what makes a bird a bird? First of all, we have bellow lungs, and birds have a totally different lung system. We have solid bones, and they have lightweight hollow bones. We don't have feathers, and they do. The combination of these three make birds excellent flyers. Why do birds have these three while other animals don't have any? In case of evolution, it means that two of these three evolved to anticipate on flying. Since it is an unguided process, it cannot anticipate. So that birds have these three combined while other creatures don't have any is plain coincidence. Even if they would have used it for other reasons, it's a rather complex coincidence. The scientists mainly focus on the evolution of feathers, mostly because lungs do not fossilize, and they conclude that birds are feathered dinosaurs. Let's see what the evidence says. According to scientists, there are fossilized protofeathers, things that are to become feathers. Images of these are rare, but here's one of those images. On that photo there is something that more or less looks like one feather on the belly of a Sinosauropteryx. This is another image of the Sinosauropteryx. This one shows that there is just a belly there, and that it is most likely not a feather. Sinosauropteryx appear to have had fur. It would be a bit weird for a dinosaur to have one feather hanging at its belly. This is a more recent artist impression of the Sinosauropteryx, because the evidence for feathers is poor. Even if it would have had a protofeather, there would be a so-called temporal paradox, meaning the timing is messed up. Archaeopteryx was found in the Jurassic, and the protofeather should be prior to that. Instead, Sinosauropteryx was found in the late Cretaceous, after that the complete bird had already arrived. Oh, and is this a bird? If so, then, well, So anytime we find feathers, we can ask the question, why is it not a bird? And in this case, it appears that it is really a complete bird. And these are drawings of feathered dinosaurs. We can then ask the question, is there really evidence for feathers at that fossil? Let's take a look. This is the structure of the creature. And this is the evidence. It's the full evidence. There isn't any report of found feathers with these feathered dinosaurs. This is even explicitly mentioned in the published documentation that no feathers were found with these. This one is named the chicken from hell. That is because it was very large and it has some chicken-like features, such as the thing on its head. But if the chicken really descended from this thing, it would have went through an ancestor without the chicken comb. Let's take a look at another issue that provides a much stronger argument for bird evolution. There are dinosaurs that are built very bird-like in their skeletons. The left is lizard-hipped and the right is bird-hipped. Its name ornithischian means bird-hipped, because its hip joint is almost exactly that of birds. So we can guess, make a prediction, based on evolutionary theory, which of these two is the ancestor of birds according to scientists in this field. Yep, it's the lizard-hipped. In the evolutionary tree, lots of features of animals keep on disappearing and reappearing. Also, the idea is that evolution is a chain of billions of random mutations that sometimes happen to be beneficial. This has led to the idea that a lot of our DNA is junk. It's a pool of trial and error DNA from which nature can try and then select the one that fits the environment. It appears that only about 2% of our DNA is coding, meaning that this area provides RNA that can be translated into proteins. And proteins are the building blocks of our body. So the 2% produces hands, hearts and hairs. Scientists expected that the majority of the rest of the DNA, probably 80%, is the junk they were looking for. So that 80% contains information that we don't use, such as feathers, fins and failed attempts, trial and error DNA and leftovers that we no longer use. This is absolutely false. A whole lot of experiments show that all of our DNA is functional. That 80% mostly contains very complex information and processing instructions. It has switches to switch specific parts of our DNA on and off, so that at the right time the right body parts form. Since evolutionary theory is based on the idea of random mutations, does this complete lack of randomness falsify evolution? Of course not. All we have to do is think of another mechanism that explains similar features to unrelated creatures. That other mechanism is called evolutionary convergence. It is some sort of designing power by natural selection. So that the duck beak is similar to that of a platypus is not because that information was still there, but because what the creature needs to do demands this shape. This shape is naturally formed because it suits its food supply. And this chicken comb is then because it's pretty and helps to find a partner. And that the bee and the naked mole rat have queens that give birth is because of the fact that this platypus has parts of his genes similar to that of humans, other parts to that of mice, and other parts similar to birds is because of This is the fossil transition from fish to land animals.
Why are you showing the coelacanth?
Well, I found on the internet that scientists considered this the fish that introduced walking.
No, not this one.
Yes, they do.
No, not at all. They used to in the 30s of the last century, but this is long gone.
Oh, why?
Well, we found live ones.
This is a living fossil?
Yes, and it doesn't walk at all, not even underwater. It's incapable of that. It cannot bend its fin to make it a weight-bearing foot, but we've got Tiktaalik now.
Nice artist impression. This is the evidence. So Tiktaalik is now the fish that introduced walking. And here's the evolutionary diagram. Let's take a closer look at Tiktaalik. What is displayed here is not what was found. There are multiple fossils, but all of them only show the front part of Tiktaalik. So this is closer to what was found. Actually, the only thing that matters is the fin or foot. That is the part that should have introduced walking. That is the actual transition. Here's a close-up of the fin and foot of the artist's impressions. Now let's take a look of the evolution of it in detail. Here is the bone structure of these 5 fins and feet. Let's see if we can put them in the right sequence, to see if we can figure out the transitions. These 3 look like they have some similarities. Let's place them in the right order. This one has the least bones, so that one may be in front. How about these 2? It could be this. And now for the other 2. They don't look related to any of the other 3. And not even to each other. This maybe? Let's see how we did. Hey! We put Houstonopteron in the middle. That one should have been in front. Wait, so the one with the least bones is number 2? Well, that didn't work out. Let's go back to the fossils. Tiktaalik and Ichthyostega. So what makes scientists think that Tiktaalik could walk? Walking appears to demand that the foot can be placed flat on the ground, something we learned from the coelacanth. Fins are made for swimming. That can be defined as the biggest difference between a fin and a foot. Let's take a fish and a frog, for example. This is the difference. Now this is what happens when we compare the coelacanth with Tiktaalik. The coelacanth was rejected because it was incapable of stepping, because it cannot place its fins flat on the ground. Here are the fins of them. Now what is so special about Tiktaalik? What makes it a better candidate than the coelacanth? Tiktaalik has fins, not an intermediate between fins and feet. There is also a temporal paradox. This is how Tiktaalik was dated, and this is how the first footprints are dated. In a lot of textbooks you can find this image. It shows that the embryo development at a specific stage is identical for a lot of creatures. This is rather strong evidence for evolution. Except for one thing. This is an artist impression. This is the real evidence. One of the things that can show if a scientific model is strong is the possibility to make a prediction with it. Let's try. This is a cow. According to evolutionary theory, this cow will change over time. Let's make a prediction. What will the offspring of the cow look like within 20 million years? Will it one day get wings and fly off? Will it get a platypus beak? Will it swim with the whales? Will it get as smart as us? According to evolutionary theory, it's all possible. So we can predict it can become almost anything. Whatever the offspring looks like eventually, it fits in the theory. Anyway, we can predict what the next offspring will be. It will probably be a cow. So since evolutionary theory predicts it is able to make anything totally different from something that exists today, there has been a lot of experimenting on this. There has been experiments on fruit flies. The fruit fly has been exposed to a lot of unnatural conditions and unnatural selection to see what happens. It appears that with the severest condition and selection, fruit flies become fruit flies. Fruit flies, fruit flies, and fruit flies. Let's look at dating of a fossil in some more detail. Probably the best known dating method to the general public is the C14 method. The C14 method can be applied accurately on things that have lived. It reaches beyond the scope of this video to explain the technical details of all the dating methods themselves. It suffices for now to say that there are about 40 radiometric dating methods and that C14 dating, also called carbon dating, is only one of them. To date a carbon-containing fossil with the C14 method is not possible for very old fossils. The absolute maximum for dating a fossil is 100,000 years in theory and probably 50,000 years in practice. Let's place a blue line which represents the time that C14 dating is valid for. The blue line is so short that it's only a dot. The 40 other dating methods date rock. The fossils in the rock is dated by the date of the rock. Let's take a look at how it works. Here we have some rock layers that contain fossils. The arrows point to the dating of the rocks that scientists have agreed upon. So if we have a fossil there, then the age is between the found ages for the rock it is in. That is how we date the majority of the fossils. It's not often done with the C14 method. The maximum age of each dating method differs, and generally we can say that dating methods with a smaller range have a higher accuracy, and dating methods with a larger range have a larger inaccuracy. So this illustrates how it works for a rock of almost 80 million years. Method 2 would give the most accurate age for this rock. When it's older, method 3 gives a better answer, because method 2 is off scale. If it's even older, method 4 gives the best answer. Well, at least this is how it works in theory. Now let's take a look at something we have a known age for. Actually, the age cannot be known for sure, because nobody was there when it happened. About dinosaurs, scientists agree that they got extinct 65 million years ago. That is way off scale for the C14 dating. So you shouldn't apply C14 method on dinosaur bones because it has no C14 anymore, unless if it is contaminated. Let's test that. Some scientists applied the C14 methods on bones of this kind of dinosaur, and it was dated 22,000 years old. That proves that the sample was contaminated. Also for this kind of dinosaur, 24,000 years old, also contaminated. More examples. All dated less than 50,000 years, so they must all be contaminated. More examples. Why are they all contaminated? That is because this is done improperly. This shows how incompetent the scientists are. They messed up all the bones. They should absolutely not apply C14 dating on dinosaur bones because we know that the dinosaurs are extinct for 65 million years. Doing that is bound to yield unreliable ages. If they would be good scientists, they would know. Let's take a look at another case where dating methods were applied. It is about the dating of this specific human fossil. It was found in a rock layer that was known to be so old that C14 method should not be applied. The area also had a volcano nearby, drawn here schematically. The layer on top is always the youngest, and the layer at the bottom is always the oldest. Volcanoes are very useful for dating because the radiometric clock resets when the rock gets molten. So we can use that as an excellent datable object. So the dating method was applied and it was found to be between 213 and 230 million years old.
Huh? So old? That can be right. Human-like creatures did not exist yet. Get rid of that date.
So the scientists started to date other layers. The layer below the rock that contains the fossil was dated 3.18 million years. So that shows that the other dating was wrong. They also selected other samples of the volcanic ash and the date was now set to 2.61 million years. Now the layer was estimated to be 2.9 million years. Since the scientists now knew what date they expected, they could apply more dating methods on the layer that contained the fossil. That is because they now had a date to calibrate on. And so 3 additional dating methods also were in the range of 2.7 to 3 million years. While this seems normal, this is actually rare. In most cases dating methods do not line up this much. But anyway, this justifies the rejection of the old age of over 200 million years.
We found the oldest human skull ever!
The oldest human skull ever, huh? Are you sure?
I don't believe that.
Some scientists were uncomfortable with that age, because it has a significant impact on evolutionary theory. So they decided to date the volcanic ash again, and they found another age, and so rejected the 2.61 million years. So they were right to be skeptical about the other dates as well.
What more fossils did you find in that layer? Well, we also found pigs and elephants.
Pigs?
Yes, pigs.
Pigs didn't evolve yet. Those days can't be right. Get rid of those ages. There. Now all the fossils are consistent with an age of 1.9 million years. And that's how the dating of fossils work. How we know if a radiometric age is reliable is easy. If it matches the theory, it's reliable. If it doesn't, it is not. Since evolutionary theory seems to predict anything can become anything, there's not really a clear prediction to make. That makes it hard to falsify evolution, maybe even impossible. However, ideas have been suggested on how to falsify evolution. One of them is, find a rabbit in the Cambrian or Precambrian and evolution is falsified.
Now when you look at these layers carefully, you find these beautiful fossils. And when I say beautiful, I am inspired by them. They're remarkable because we are looking at the past. You find down low, you'll find what you might consider as rudimentary sea animals. Up above, you'll find the famous trilobites. Above that, you might find some clams, some oysters. And above that, you'll find some mammals. You never, ever find a higher animal mixed in with a lower one. You never find a lower one trying to swim its way to the higher one. If it all happened in such an extraordinary short amount of time, if this water drained away just like that, wouldn't we expect to see some turbulence? And by the way, anyone here, really, if you can find one example of that anywhere in the world, the scientists of the world challenge you. They would embrace you. You would be a hero. You would change the world if you could find one example of that anywhere. People have looked and looked and looked. They have not found a single one.
And well, we don't find any air-breathing, vulnerable, carrot-eating fluffy rabbit buried together with the crawling deep sea life of the Cambrian. Assume they have lived in the same time. Then it's quite hard to think of a scenario where a rabbit and a lobster would meet. Even in a case of a flood, rabbits float. But what if we would find it anyway? What would happen? First of all, what makes a layer Cambrian? Is it the dating method? No, actually it's the fossil. The dating methods are there to support the dating of the fossils. Find a trilobite, then it's supposed to be Cambrian. That defines which dating method to apply. Then the dating is done using that method, and some samples will be within the expected range. That supports the age of the fossil. Then we find a rabbit that is totally out of place according to evolutionary theory, and the scientist who would find it would be a hero. No, not really. What would happen is that first of all everybody would demand a thorough examination to see if the rabbit is genuine, to see if it is not a hoax. Okay, that's fair. Now assume we would find it and it is not a hoax. A rabbit is not supposed to be Cambrian, so we would run through the procedure again. For a rabbit we are allowed to use the C14 method because it could be recent. And just like as we have seen with dinosaur, it always gives a relatively young age. So this rabbit will turn out to be young according to C14 method. For dinosaurs this is considered due to contamination, but rabbits are allowed to be young. So one of the things that the scientists could conclude in a case like this is that there is a young rabbit buried somehow in an old layer. But again, no, we don't find Cambrian rabbits. This is just a theoretical example. But how about Cretaceous ducks? Or Mesozoic squirrels? Those have been published in the magazine Nature. They were found buried together with dinosaurs, and it appears that this kind of finds are actually quite common. Most dinosaur researchers are simply interested in the dinosaurs and don't care much about the other fossils. Somehow, some of these other creatures survived the horrible catastrophe 65 million years ago, while the dinosaurs were completely wiped out. Or these creatures re-evolved after that catastrophe. There are more than 400 species found out of place according to evolutionary theory, including human fossils. 10 remains of human beings were found buried under 15 meters of 100 million year old hard rock. There's also the other way around. Dinosaurs are supposed to have been extinct for 65 million years, but some dinosaur bones still contain soft tissue. Look, this is soft dinosaur tissue. It is supposed to be decayed by now, and it isn't. Ideas have been suggested to explain this not decayed tissue, and it appears that iron in blood cells could preserve it a bit, just like formaldehyde. That slows down the decay process, and one can calculate that in optimal conditions, the last bit of tissue would fall apart after about 7 million years. That's not 65 million. So this scientist is now a hero, and he is fired. Some museums have out of place finds in their collection, but they've put it in the basement. Why? Well, museums are there to make you understand things. So they don't like this kind of science. The most extreme out of place find is also from the magazine Nature. Almost 50 years ago, scientists found pollen of modern trees in a pre-Cambrian layer. However, scientists have an answer to this that keeps everybody satisfied for the past 50 years. One day, scientists will find an answer to this mystery. Now, falsify that, huh? Let's take a look at the development of the very first cell. A cell is actually a lot like a tiny computer. It has DNA that can be compared to a tiny hard drive that contains all the information on how to build a living creature. It has tiny devices such as polymerases, helicases and a lot more to access the data. Every time it accesses exactly the right information to build whatever is needed at the right moment. The DNA copies into smaller RNA, which are snippets of code. The RNA gets out of the cell core, and over there the RNA is translated into proteins. It's like a 3D printer that uses Lego blocks to build all kind of things, like hands, hearts and brains, to name some. Okay, let's go. In the first billion years of the Earth, the first cell forms. First of all, RNA formed. RNA is capable of giving instructions, something that DNA cannot do. The RNA was floating in a slurry of advanced chemicals, and after a long time it contained the correct information to copy a protocell, the predecessor of the cell. Later, DNA formed to maintain that information, and a topoisomerase, a polymerase, a ligase and a primase to extract the correct data from the DNA and to process it into RNA. Luckily, that fragile first protocell survived and finally formed a complete cell. It was now ready to copy itself by RNA translation. It was possible thanks to a comet impact which brought all the amino acids that were necessary for the first cell. In comets and meteorites, some of the 20 amino acids necessary for life naturally appear. This is a mixture of left-handed and right-handed amino acids. Life only contains left-handed amino acids. How these left-handed amino acids were sorted for the first life is unknown. Of course, we shouldn't expect evidence for this event, since we cannot expect the first protocells to still exist after 3.5 billion years. But we can replicate this in the laboratory, to find out what could have happened. Well, actually nobody has ever been able to replicate it yet, because it's too complex, but who knows, maybe we can in the future. Look, here we have one of the oldest fossils ever, a cyanobacteria from the deep Precambrian. Pretty cool, huh? Look, it's even a living fossil, and all originated from one single ancestor, meaning that this was a unique event. Or is it? We wouldn't have all of this trouble of trying to replicate life if we would see life forming from scratch over and over again. One thing that would help is if we would find extraterrestrial life. What you see here though is all fantasy. This is the evidence. One of the reasons why so many people support the theory of evolution is because it has so much explanatory power. Example, how come we prefer pretty people over ugly people? Scientists answer this. It is because of evolution. Pretty people are more healthy and more fertile, so it helps us to find the right partner we want to share our genes with. That gives a prediction that pretty people are more fertile than ugly people. Later a study was done and it appeared that the opposite was true. Ugly people are more fertile than pretty people. Does this falsify evolution? Of course not. All we have to do is think again. In order for ugly people to survive, even though they are less wanted, they must be more fertile. In most cases, if evolutionary theory explains something, it explains the opposite just as well. Its explanatory power is almost unlimited. In order to show evolution is true, we should find things in our body that are clearly badly designed. Since evolution is an unguided process, we would have to find traces of an unexperienced designer, and so bad design. In this case, let's not consider diseases and things that happen at later age. That's not part of the design, just like worn tires aren't part of the design of a car. In a body like ours, that is so full of inventions that work very well without maintenance, it is quite hard to find an example of bad design. Nevertheless, some scientists like Richard Dawkins pointed to something that is ridiculously badly designed. Our eyes. Let's take a look at how our eyes could have evolved according to evolution scientists. Oh, and eyes did not evolve once, but 50 to 100 times individually. This case of bad design, however, is about our eyes. Here we go. First, there would be a light receptor. Then that would become hollow to make it possible to direct our eyes to something. That would improve through time. Then some transparent body would form. A lens would form step by step to keep on improving sight. And eventually we would have a complete eye with an iris and things like that. This scheme kind of explains 6 out of the more than 30 components of our eyes. And actually we do find something close to this in the fossil record. Backwards, but okay. So what exactly is bad about it? Well, every designer would know that it would be helpful to make the light receptors face toward the light. Makes sense, huh? With octopuses that is the case. They don't see as well as we do though. But anyway, evolution made a mistake. It is actually so badly designed that even evolution cannot really explain it. Because somewhere in the process, the light receptor got reversed. In order to get the nerves to the brain, we have a blind spot with the expense of some of our eyesight. All because of the ridiculous reversed light receptors. But the worst thing is that we would be able to see much more if the backside of our nerves wouldn't be there to block the majority of our eyesight. Well, this isn't the full story. Actually, we have Müller cells. This is natural fiberglass that guides every photon, that's the light particle, to the tip of our light receptors. The Müller cells provide space for our nerves so that they can be in reverse without spilling any light. And this actually has a reason. Now the blood supply touches the tip of our nerves so that it works as a cooling device and so that the nerves can be repaired if they would be damaged. The other way around would also work, but then the light would have to pass through the blood vessels, which actually would spill a lot more light than this way. So let's compare our eyes to this nifty invention that actually is clever. Eyes resolution is comparable to 575 megapixel. Well, that is 7.5 megapixel for this camera. Eyes are self-cooling. The camera is not. Eyes are self-repairing. The camera is not. Eyes are self-cleaning. The camera is not. But let's just ignore that and laugh out loud. It is often stated that evolution is proven because it is possible to make an unambiguous tree of life. But that's not true. The tree of life differs per subject of investigation. So you get another tree of life when you investigate DNA than when you investigate body features. Instead of all pathways leading to the same answer, it is actually more like a prioritizing system. If body features seem to point to something closely related, while DNA points another way, the DNA is seen as more relevant and overrules the body features. Now it would help if we would actually find two trees that do result in the same family tree. And finally, there is one way found on how to do that. This tree is based on DNA, and now if we also make a tree based on microRNA, you will see that the tree is almost exactly the same. No! Okay, let's go to the time where we all been waiting for. The formation of complex life. 3, 2, 1. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Cambrian explosion. At the very first beginning of the Earth, there was not a single body plan. At the beginning of the Cambrian, there was still not a single body plan. At the end of the Cambrian, there were 26 body plans. Nowadays, there are 26 body plans. It's amazing, it's incredible. All body plans formed in the Cambrian, and there are no fossil transitions found for them. Were the ancestors too soft to fossilize? No! We have found fossilized jellyfish. Are they different than today's life? No! These shells are just the same. Do we see fossil transitions of organs? No! Trilobites even had complete eyes already. This is the time where animals with hearts survive those without hearts. Those with kidneys survive those without kidneys. Those that could reach their food survived those that could not. Those that were able to poop survived those that could not. Those that breathed survived those that could not. They are complete. So this is the evidence for evolutionary theory, that everything popped into existence. Question: can this music be random? No, it can't be. Why can we know that it is not a random sound that coincidentally sounds like music? Let's find out what random and not random is. How about these four? Are these random? Number 3 is not random. It's clearly a message. It's information. Number 2 has a pattern. We can see that even when we don't see what it is. It's actually a snippet of a bitmap file. That's a computer image. It's this image. Number 1 is generated using a randomizer. So that one is random. Deliberately random in this case. Number 4 looks just as random, but it isn't. It's a snippet of a JPEG file. That's a computer image. It's the same image as the bitmap file, but it's a lot more compressed. So it looks random, but it is very not. And this? Is this random? No, and we can see that when we show it like this. This is the Arecibo message. It's a file of about 210 bytes. It's a file that scientists send into space in the hope that aliens will someday pick it up. If they exist. Scientists have agreed to send this message because aliens would be able to know for sure that it's not random. It's a piece of information. So why exactly can we know things are information and not some random signal? Is it because it is ordered? These snowflakes are clearly ordered. They are ordered in a very beautiful configuration, but they do not contain information. So order alone is not enough. Physical processes can create order, not information. So what is information? Information has three components: a sender, a message, and a receiver. If all three are in the process, information is involved, and the information itself is in the message. There are multiple ways to recognize information, even if not all three are available. One example: we can recognize information when we understand the message. Now for some more details. A medium carries the information, but a medium does not produce information. That's the sender. And in some cases there is a package to protect the information, so that random processes cannot easily damage the message. If we want the chance of damage of the message even smaller, we can do that by using a backup. So when we find information and also backups, we know undeniably that we have found information. There's another way to recognize information. When we see something passing from a sender to a receiver, and the receiver responds in a way that somehow makes sense, we can be sure that information is involved, even if we don't see or understand the content of the message. Information demands intelligence. Why? Can't there be random messages? Why can't scientists know for sure that when aliens would pick up the Arecibo message, that intelligent beings like us must be the sender? Because if you put an ape behind a typewriter and you wait long enough, he could just type a book of Shakespeare coincidentally. After all, if we wait long enough, anything can happen, right? Take 2 cups of water. Fill one of them with a lot of water and another one with a bit of water. Then connect them with a little tube at the bottom. Then the water will flow from the more filled cup to the lesser filled cup. And that will continue until there is a balance. We can wait billions of years, but the water will never flow uphill. So no, it's not true that anything can happen given enough time. So what if we put an ape behind a typewriter? Let's see if we can calculate how long it takes before we get a book of Shakespeare by chance. To do so, let's see how chance works. Assume we have 10 rooms with 10 apes, and they're going to type numbers from 1 to 10 randomly, and all of them are going to type a unique number. Apes don't do that, but we just assume it for this example. Let's just call them randomizers. Now pick a random number between 1 and 10. How large is the chance that one of them will contain that number? It's 100%, because all of the numbers are in there exactly once. If we let them type numbers between 1 and 20, the chance that you pick up a number that's in there is 50%, because half the numbers are in there. This works universally, so we're going 3D. We're going to make 1,000 rooms by dividing a box into 10 by 10 by 10 pieces. And then we're going to let each of them generate a unique random number between 1 and 2,000. The chance that one random number between 1 and 2,000 is somewhere in there is again 50%, because half of the numbers are in there. Now we're going to add time. We are going to let all of them generate unique numbers 10 times. Then we have 10,000 unique numbers. So if we let them randomly generate unique numbers between 1 and 20,000, the chance we pick a number that's in there is again 50%. With the random number between 1 and 2 million, the chance reduces to 0.5%. And when we make the number larger, the chance reduces together with that. This was a small box. Now let's use the entire universe. Scientists say that the diameter of the known universe is 93 billion light years. It isn't a box, but for this calculation it doesn't matter. So how large is 93 billion light years? Well, there are 365.25 days per year, 24 hours per day, 3,600 seconds per hour, and light travels 300 million meters per second. Multiply all that, and then we get the diameter of the universe expressed in meters. Cool. Meters. Why meters? We can go smaller. Why not millimeters or micrometers or smaller? How small can we go? Scientists tell us that the smallest unit possible is the Planck length. It's really small. There are quite a lot of Planck lengths per meter. There are more Planck lengths per meter than that there are meters in the observable universe. And so now we have the diameter of the universe expressed in Planck lengths. Cool. But the universe has a volume. So we need to do this value to the third power. And then we have the universe expressed in cubic Planck lengths. Let's call that cubic Plancks. But there's also time. Alright. So how old is the universe? Scientists say it's 13.798 billion years old. And we could debate whether or not this is true. But just let's assume this value for this calculation. Who cares? How old is that? Well, there are 365.25 days per year, 24 hours per day, and 3,600 seconds per hour. So this is the age of the universe expressed in seconds. Cool. Why seconds? We can go faster. Milliseconds or microseconds, or what's the fastest? That would be the Planck time. That's quite a short time. So here we have the amount of Planck times per second. And here we have the age of the universe expressed in Planck times. We can multiply that by the cubic Plancks. And now we can say that there have been this amount of cubic Planck times in the universe until now. A bit of a weird unit and quite a huge number. So what exactly does this mean? Well, it means we can give every indivisible time in every indivisible space in the universe a unique number between 1 and this value. So if we would stack it with extremely fast randomizers, we could get it all up to that number if we would use every part of the universe for as long as the universe exists till today according to scientists. This value is smaller than 2 to the power of 818. This number can be stored in a file of 103 bytes. So if we would be able to make the universe as a complete ultimate randomizer, it could randomize all possible unique files with a length of 103 bytes once. The erasable message is 210 bytes. So if we would let the ultimate randomizer generate files of 210 bytes, the chance that it would generate this message once is smaller than 0.00000 and a lot more zeros, 65%. So the chance is 0. So the chance that an ape writes a book of Shakespeare accidentally is quite a lot smaller. It's absolutely impossible. Conclusion. We don't have enough apes. For the books of Shakespeare, we need Shakespeare. Information demands intelligence. Any piece of information larger than half the erasable message cannot be formed by chance, and so it demands intelligence. To put it more generally, any random process that is not part of a sender cannot add information. Instead, it will damage it. Example. We have a piece of paper with a message written on it. Then a bird poops on it. Even if that has the shape of the letter L, it actually damages the message. DNA then. Our cells contain information. Yes, it's information. Why is it information? Because we see it produces very useful products. It has a sender, it has a receiver, it makes sense, so it must be information. It's as much as an encyclopedia of information in our cells. It's way too much to form randomly. Evolutionary theory says this formed by chance anyway. How then? Well, the theory says that it formed in portions. Small pieces of random information are added every time. Let's see. Our DNA contains several components. Parts of it is coding. That's the part that codes proteins, which in turn are the building blocks of life. Other parts are not coding, so it doesn't produce proteins. It has been assumed that the majority is junk. Recent studies clearly refute that, however. There's also a part that is clearly processing instructions. Let's focus on the part that everybody agrees upon. It's the coding DNA. So it's like a recipe for a protein, which are the Lego blocks for life. The longest protein code is 2.5 million nucleotides long. It's easy to say that that would be impossible to form by chance at once. So let's take a much shorter one. One of the shortest protein codes is 500 nucleotides long. Let's see if this one can be formed by chance. A nucleotide can be considered a genetic bit, just like in computers. But instead that it could be only 1 or 0. It can be 4 different values, A, G, C or T. So a code of 500 nucleotides long could have 4 to the power of 500 different values. That's 2 to the power of 1000 different values. This protein code can be stored in a computer file of 125 bytes long. We've seen that the ultimate randomizer could generate files of 103 bytes. So this is larger. So the chance that the ultimate randomizer could generate this protein code is quite small. It's actually impossible. And then we didn't even consider that genetics contain protons, which are a lot larger than the Planck length. We also didn't keep in mind that the majority of the universe is empty. Also, the Planck time is way too fast, and the majority of the materials is inside stars, so it doesn't produce genetic codes. So we're coming closer to the chance that a small protein code forms by chance. And this would be the chance if all the rest of the universe would be organic material, which isn't the case. And all of it would be constantly forming DNA code for more than 13 billion years in optimal conditions. Now let's be fair. There are shorter protein codes. Here's a well-known very short protein code. It's 157 nucleotides long. With that length, there are 3.33 times 10 to the power of 94 possibilities. And this is one of them. So yes, the ultimate randomizer would be able to generate it. But what about Earth? Could this happen on Earth? Let's calculate that. For this calculation, we pretend that the entire Earth consists of organic materials. This is the amount of atoms in the world. Then each atom must try quite a lot of possibilities. If we divide that by the amount of seconds that have passed according to scientists, then we see that each atom must try a whole lot of possibilities per second to find this code. And that would be if each atom would have its own code, which isn't the case, because one code consists of quite a lot of atoms. The speed displayed here is a whole lot faster than the fastest computer on Earth can count. Really, DNA isn't that fast. So if we would stack the entire universe with this material, it would probably find the code randomly. But any planet wouldn't. But even if it would then life have originated randomly? No, then we would have a protein code. We would not even have the protein, just the code. And now let's see what this code is for. Insulin. So let's assume that this code would somehow accidentally get translated into a protein. This can't just happen, but let's assume it. Then what would we have? Life? No, we would have insulin. Insulin is a complex chemical, a hormone. It's essential to us. People suffering from diabetes don't have enough insulin, so they can inject some insulin with a pen like this. Without insulin you die. But insulin alone does not live. It has no reason to begin with the process of survival of the fittest. So the code would soon disappear before it's used by anything. The chance that there is another user code nearby at the same time is again equally small. So for the chance that life pops in existence, we need to multiply the chances of all individual protein codes involved for that. So it doesn't help to say it formed step by step. It all has to be there at once. One scientist has determined that it would require at least 1500 errorless steps for a code to be able to copy itself. That's 1500 bits. That's a lot more than the 1000, which is the maximum for the ultimate randomizer. The smallest known DNA sequence in an organism is in a parasite called mycoplasma. It's more than 500,000 nucleotides long, so that's a whole lot larger. Random genetics can be produced in a laboratory, but like we calculated, this is not enough. And we would want an entire ocean of the stuff to have existed in the past, to make the chance of a useful code larger than in a laboratory. But there's a problem with this stuff. Shake it and it's gone. So again we can conclude we don't have enough apes. Useful DNA cannot form by chance. We're almost there. There are scientists who say that genetic algorithms solve the problem. There are pieces of code that automatically produces useful code. There have even been made computer programs that simulate that. But for that you need a genetic computer program. Let's take an example. Here we have the genetic algorithm framework. It's 146,000 bytes, so that doesn't help much. The smallest genetic algorithm isn't smaller than the smallest protein code. And by the way, who made genetic algorithm framework? An ape? No. So it still demands intelligence. So if DNA would be intelligently written information, we should recognize some protection, backups and repair systems. Well, there still is a lot to discover in this field, but repair systems have been found in DNA, and those are very, very complex. Can repair systems be random? No way! There are also a lot of backup systems in DNA. For example, chromosomes come in pairs, and every chromosome contains the information twice anyway, because the nucleotides come in base pairs. So every piece of genetic information exists 4 times in your body. And this is just one example of backup systems. There's an exception to chromosome pairs. The male Y chromosome is not paired. It's only one chromosome that is copied identically every time. Computers have read the code from front to end, and it appears that the Y chromosome is very special. It contains palindromes that hold all the information at least twice. Some information is in there even 8 times. That's an impressive backup. So here's the final conclusion. DNA is clearly information, and it can absolutely not be random. I want a new car, but cars are expensive. So my new car should 3D print new cars, so that all next cars are free. And I don't like driving to the petrol station all the time. I want it to find its own fuel. I want the fuel to be free too. The car I have now is polluting, both when I drive it and the building procedure. I want the next car to be not polluting. And I want all the materials to be 100% recyclable. And the car I have now needs maintenance. If there's a crack in my windscreen, It needs to be replaced as a whole. I just want it to be self-repairing. And if we're going to 3D print new cars, we must make sure that every new car is unique. If all the cars would look the same, it would be so boring. I also want it to be able to go on rough terrain. And I want it to avoid obstacles by itself. But too bad, cars like that don't exist. It's just too hard to make it. We need some very intelligent inventors to work together. Maybe in the future, with a lot of effort, we can make cars like that. Boy, that would be clever. This is a hinge. Question: was this invented? Yes, obviously. But why do we know? Well, this hinge has a purpose. It is arranged for that purpose. It is for opening a door or something like that. This is a computer. What is the purpose of a computer? The purpose of a computer is harder to define than a function of a hinge. Not because it doesn't have function, but it has multiple functions. The hinge has only one. But generally, a computer is made for calculating. So if it has purpose, it's invented. Is that correct? This is a slinky. It has the purpose of stepping down the stairs. But before it had that function, it was already invented. It was an industrial spring. The inventor of the slinky knocked it over and it stepped on books, his table, and then on the floor. So the slinky accidentally got its purpose. So that is possible. This is a rock. A rock isn't invented. It's purposeless. Nevertheless, we can give it a purpose. So when things have a purpose, it's not enough to guarantee it's invented. However, could this hinge have been accidentally invented? Well, no. But why? The reason we know is this hinge has some very precise properties to fulfill its purpose. Those were deliberately arranged, such as the holes, the flat side, and that 3 pieces fit together perfectly. We count 4 dependencies before it meets its purpose. The slinky that was accidentally invented already had its properties for something else. Actually, this hinge still doesn't fulfill its purpose. For that it needs something else, like a door. Here's a working hinge. If we would place a door against the wall and we would lie a hinge on the floor next to it, could the hinge be placed correctly, naturally, or accidentally? No. Even if we wait centuries, it won't happen. Nature will eventually destroy it. The hinge would rust. So what exactly is inventing? Inventing is a process where one recognizes there is a need for an object with a particular purpose. Then the person designs and makes that object. And it is obviously invented when multiple dependencies are met before it functions. Let's take a look at another example. Assume we have a large canyon and we would recognize that there is a need for a bridge. We could just add a concrete slab there and problem solved. But if the gap is too large, it won't hold. So we have to think of something more clever. We can put 2 poles on each side, then we can tie that to the ground, and next we can build a part of the bridge and tie that to the poles as well. And then we can add the last part and also tie that to the poles. This bridge is invented, and it could not have been not invented. Could nature solve this problem as well? Oh yes. Look, a bridge. Which of these two is better? Well, it's the invented bridge. The one on the right is not even a bridge. It just destroyed the canyon. It even blocks the water. Eventually the water might even flow over this and it couldn't be used as a bridge anymore. But the invented bridge, before it is complete, is useless. Nobody can pass the canyon on this almost complete bridge. This is how we can recognize inventions. There is a guarantee. The invented bridge has 5 precise dependencies before it works. The natural bridge has only 1. When something has a lot of dependencies before it works, it cannot be not invented. We can also edit objects that are already invented. We can tune them to make them perform better. Tuning isn't required, it's just optimizing it for a particular purpose. Every addition has a slight effect of improvement, and it keeps on working while it's being modified. But there's also a limit to what can be considered tuning. These two cars look identical from the outside, but they are very not. The left car drives on petrol, and the right car drives on electricity. Can we consider this tuning? No, we can't. We can't modify the engine one step at a time to make it drive on electricity instead of petrol. During the modification it doesn't work. We need to replace the entire engine at once. So the electric engine is a completely different invention than the petrol engine. Any intermediate doesn't work. Even a hybrid car, that's a car that has both a petrol engine and an electric engine, doesn't work with 2 half engines. It has 2 complete engines. Half engines don't do anything. And so you can't see that on the outside. Next. Can you tune a car into an airplane? Well, that's doubtful. But can you accidentally tune your car into an airplane when you did not intend to do so? No, that's impossible. Even if your car would come off the ground somehow, you can't control it in the air when you haven't designed something for that. You'd probably just crash. It can't be considered an airplane. A lot of inventions are a combination of multiple inventions. A wheel on a car is an invention on its own. And even though the car and the wheelbarrow are 2 completely different inventions, the design of their wheels are the same. Why do we use the same design for the wheel of a wheelbarrow and a car? And why don't we give a wheelbarrow square wheels? Well, because it doesn't work.
Is 4:55:03.
Adriaan, ik heb een wekkerradio gemaakt die kan praten.
Zie, dat is geen wekkerradio die kan praten.
Wat dan?
Dat is een robot.
Wat is dat dan niet?
Een fotocopie.
Wat staat erop?
Dat lijkt zoiets als een steen met eigenaardige tekens erop, hè?
Of course, this is fantasy. Putting a clock on a radio doesn't invent a robot. You just saw a bending finger, which isn't very exciting. Nevertheless, you just saw 3 hinges working together. An interesting thing about fingers is that the muscles are not in your hand. There are only tendons there. It works like a brake cable of a bike. The muscle is actually in your arm, over there. This muscle depends on blood that supplies the fuel and oxygen, and a nerve from the brain to send a signal that tells the finger to bend, and bones to make it solid and give it a useful shape, and hinges, and a digestion system to filter the right materials from food. and lungs to filter oxygen from the air, and precise fuel supplies. If one is missing, this just doesn't work. Without one of these, you cannot bend your finger. And there wouldn't be much purpose to it if we couldn't bend our fingers back again. We can explain how this all works. Scientists have figured most of this out a couple of centuries ago. Actually, they were looking for the human soul. They were looking for the maker. They were looking for God. While doing that, they figured out the anatomy of the human body, which made them wonder, where's God? The scientists ran into a surprise. The human body is a machine. So that means no divine power is needed to explain it. And today scientists conclude that it could have originated naturally. Interesting. Let's do that again. This is a coffee machine. It's a machine. So no divine power is needed to explain it. It can originate naturally. That last one is a wrong conclusion, at least for this machine. Actually, concluding that it is a machine is where operational science ends. The rest is historical science. We know this coffee machine was made by a company called Philips. We can take it apart to look for Philips. But if we do, we won't find Philips. So where's Philips? What were the scientists thinking? Finding God by taking apart our body? That doesn't make sense. You can't find a maker by dismantling a machine. Here you see 4 completely different machines. But they have one thing in common. They are all obviously created. Should we conclude us included? For a lot of people, this is hard to accept. Why is that? Is that because we can reproduce? Let's see. This is a drone. Engineers are currently inventing drones that can 3D print new drones during their missions. So they will be able to reproduce. Still, the first one must be invented. So that's not the point. So what is the problem? Well, these machines are man-made. The first human being, also a machine, was not man-made. So there's the problem. This is the point where creationists usually start waving with a Bible. Let's just not. We know these 3 objects are not created simply because we have the natural laws complete and we can observe these things forming without them being created. And we know these are created. We don't need a Bible to figure that out. So is there a way to tell whether or not this is created? Let's put it this way. Can nature invent? According to scientists, all life evolved. Let's see. This is a tiger, which is part of a family of rather different animals, which are probably all the result of one pair of cats. We can actually observe animals changing over time. And we call that evolution. So in that sense, we can say that evolution is a fact. That means we see evolution occurring today. That is operational science. But what exactly is evolution capable of? Let's take a look at that in detail. Look at these dogs. Just like the cats, they differ a lot. But a lot of this is due to breeding. Some dog races are deliberately bred by humans to make them very suitable for a particular purpose. Nature can do that too. That is called natural selection. One kind of animal can change into a great variety. Then nature can accidentally select based on a particular purpose. It's a bit like the slinky. Nature can accidentally select a purpose to something that was not intended to fulfill that purpose. But at the same time, it reduces variety. We can consider natural selection natural breeding. So scientists describe evolution as a combination of random mutations plus natural selection. Then we can ask the question, what is the limit of evolution? But it's not really possible to define a limit. But does that mean it's unlimited? Another question, what is the longest possible human jump? We can't really define a limit. But is it unlimited? Will we ever be able to jump to the moon? No. So even if we can't define a limit, it doesn't mean it's unlimited. What we should do is take a look at the process of inventing. What happens when you keep on breeding bears to make them fit for a very cold environment? Will they become penguins? No. Bears have changed into polar bears. Penguins also changed. These penguins live in very warm environments of Galapagos, while others are now capable of withstanding the colds of Antarctica. For these animals, nature was able to select the best fitting ones. Every new generation was a step towards these extreme types. So nature was able to recognize the improvements. So there we see the result of natural selection. It is natural breeding. In terms of inventing, this is tuning. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Why is this question asked so often? It is because of circular dependencies. The chicken is dependent on the egg, and the egg is dependent on the chicken. So which evolved first? We see more of these circular dependencies in nature. Even in the tiniest form of life we can see that. DNA is dependent on the cell that holds it. RNA is dependent on the DNA that codes it. Proteins are dependent on RNA that translates into it. And cells are built from proteins. So which came first? And why did it accidentally get a purpose? This still hasn't been figured out. We also have examples in nature of multiple dependencies. Blood clotting looks simple, but it is dependent on many different elements in our blood. If one is missing, it won't work. This is similar to the example of the bridge. So in this case, tuning won't do. Blood clotting is an invention. In this case, nature could not have seen any improvement until the invention was complete. Natural selection is insufficient to explain it. Another example. This is a bull. Just like all other land mammals, it has its testicles hanging outside its body. That has a purpose. They must be slightly below body temperature in order to function properly. But whales are supposed to have evolved from land mammals, but it doesn't have its testicles hanging outside its body. That's because the water is too cold for that to work. So the whale has its testicles inside its body. But still it has to be cooled down in order to work. It has a blood vessel that goes to its tail. Then it makes a few turns there to cool down the blood to the right temperature. And then it goes a long way back to its testicles. Over there, the blood vessel is twisted around its testicles to cool them down to exactly the right temperature. That's 4 dependencies. It really is a completely different invention, and any intermediate doesn't work. So we can consider evolution tuning, but inventing is not the same as tuning. We see lots of inventions in nature. When there are multiple dependencies before it works, nature cannot recognize improvement. And so natural selection could not be the answer. So the sentence evolution is a fact means we see natural tuning. It doesn't mean anything more. It's not a fact that evolution can form life from scratch, or that we evolved from a single-celled organism. There simply isn't evidence for that. Survival of the fittest is not the point. Arrival of the fittest is the problem. We've gathered enough evidence to finally draw a conclusion. Okay, so why again was only evolution considered? Because the alternatives are creation and intelligent design. This is the list of problems to those alternatives, and so these are the reasons to consider them pseudoscience. The alternatives are therefore eliminated beforehand. If evolution is true, we should not find large contradictions from the evidence. So let's see. Let's arrange the fossil record to the timeline. It's said that the first bacteria evolved into existence about 3.5 billion years ago. Then the first animals were all sea life that evolved 540 million years ago. This evolved into land life 390 million years ago, in the form of tetrapods, which means four-legged. 230 million years ago they evolved into dinosaurs, which later got extinct about 65 million years ago. Then 150 million years ago the birds arose from the dinosaurs, and 125 million years ago the first mammals showed up. Then 50 million years ago the mammals evolved into sea mammals like whales. 3 million years ago the first humans showed up. All these new groups should have had transitions from one distinct group to the other. Those are said to be found in the fossil record. Let's make some space on the screen. We are going to show the most important and famous transitions here. The trilobite as one of the first complex life forms, Tiktaalik as the transition from fish to tetrapods, Archaeopteryx as the dinosaur to bird transition, Rhodocetus as the transition to whales, and finally Lucy as the shared ancestor of apes and humans. Note that these are all artist impressions. So let's show the evidence. The Cambrian trilobite is a complete animal, even with complete eyes. This is known as the Cambrian explosion, and it doesn't show any transitions. Tiktaalik. First, the coelacanth used to be considered the ancestor of tetrapods, until living ones were found that showed it couldn't walk. It's replaced by Tiktaalik. The evidence shows exactly the same problem with Tiktaalik as with the coelacanth. It can't have walked. It had weak fins that cannot support the weight of Tiktaalik. Then the birds. Some fossils are considered feathered dinosaurs. However, there is no evidence for feathers with any of these. Archaeopteryx is the oldest fossil that really shows feathers, but it also shows it was a real complete bird, not a transition. Apologetiek was considered the transition between land animals and whales. New evidence showed it couldn't be, so now Rhodocetus is the transition, but the evidence is rather incomplete. So the interpretation of transition is based on what we don't see, not on what we see as evidence. Lucy is a combination of a chimpanzee and a human skeleton, which were found 200 meters apart. Neanderthals were slightly different than us, but there is no compelling evidence as to why we should consider them not human. The variety in dogs is much greater, for example. So technically, these fossils are the most prominent and famous pieces of evidence for evolutionary theory. It are the remnants of a fish, a bird, an incomplete skeleton, and a chimpanzee. So much for evidence for evolution. Here we've put the pieces of the evidence in a timeline. This is all the evidence there is to support fossil transitions. Now the evidence for the dating method. Radiometric dating supports evolutionary theory. Sometimes. And when it doesn't, evolutionary theory itself is the evidence to reject the dating. To scientists, it's more important to find what's buried together than the dates following from radiometric dating. So evolutionary theory itself is support for the dating of evolutionary theory, no matter what the evidence is. Even when we use this method, there are a lot of fossils that eventually end up with the wrong timing. So that means that geologic layers that have gone through a procedure to define the date of the layer contain fossils that shouldn't be buried in that layer according to the theory. Such as this human fossil, which is at least 7 million years too early. Or this one that is more than 90 million years early. And if this is a bird, then it's just as old as the oldest dinosaurs. That means it cannot have evolved from dinosaurs. Beside that, the so-called feathered dinosaurs, which didn't even have feathers, were about 100 million years too late. Over 400 modern species are found buried together with dinosaurs. Also, soft tissue in dinosaur bones and radiocarbon dating showed that the dinosaurs cannot be as old as 65 million years, which is the date the dinosaurs are supposed to be extinct. Tetrapod footprints are found to be 10 million years older than the so-called transition Tiktaalik. There are pollen found of modern trees in the Precambrian, and there are many living fossils. The age of the fossils that are similar to today's species are in the hundreds of millions of years, even up to 3.5 billion years.
You never ever find a higher animal mixed in with a lower one. You never find a lower one trying to swim its way to the higher one. People have looked and looked and looked. They have not found a single one.
Well, these are some of the anomalies that are not found anywhere in the world, according to this guy. Now, one could argue for the feathered dinosaurs that are too late for the theory, and living fossils do not have to be a problem for evolutionary theory. However, fossils that are too early are really a problem for the theory. Something cannot form before its ancestor. And when the speed of evolution is so variable that it can stand still for 3.5 billion years and also go very fast in only a few million years, it would mean that the speed of evolution is just that, variable. How are we supposed to make formulas out of that? So, are fossils never out of place? We just showed they are. But some fossils are indeed never found buried together, such as a trilobite and a rabbit. This is considered to be because of evolution. They say the rabbit did not exist before the trilobite was extinct. But the coelacanth is also never found buried together with the rabbit, and the coelacanth is a living fossil. So evolution is not the answer for this case. There is another reason to why the rabbit never got buried together, even though they have been alive at the same time. If this is so for this case, then that might just as well apply for other cases. Are there alternatives possible? Well, yes. If they lived at the same time, they can just be buried separately for a number of reasons. This illustration is just an example, but the point is that it is never considered. The dinosaur extinction is questionable for reasons we have mentioned before. A third reason is that humans made drawings of dinosaurs. Their scientific level wasn't as good as ours, so they couldn't have based their ideas on the skeletons in a museum. Note that complete skeletons of dinosaurs are extremely rare. The drawings we make today are very often based on combined skeletons. These aren't. By the way, 200 years ago they weren't called dinosaurs, they were called dragons. So far the evidence does not show evolution is a scientific established fact. The theory is largely contradicted by the evidence. Alternatives are not considered, not because of the evidence, but the theory is a mere presupposition. All the alleged transitions that do not have evidence would be unique events even if they would have happened. Next point, is evolution falsifiable? How does science work? Well, one way to do it is to form a theory. From that theory you can set up a hypothesis. Then you can test the hypothesis. If the test confirms the hypothesis, it supports the theory. The theory shows to have some explanatory power. If the test rejects the hypothesis, the theory is false. That's how to falsify a theory. One of the strong arguments for evolutionary theory, they say that multiple investigations show exactly the same evolutionary tree. So both the anatomy and the DNA of a whale and a land mammal are similar, for example. However, this is very often not the case. In much more than 50% of the cases, similar features of animals and plants are shown to be not because of shared ancestors. Their shared ancestors did not have this property. Each different analysis of the evidence shows a completely different tree, so instead it is a prioritizing system. DNA is considered the most important evidence to build the evolutionary tree from. Only when it's not available, such as in fossils, the body features are used to complete the evolutionary tree. This is also done when DNA fails to make a conclusion possible. However, sometimes it isn't possible to draw a sound conclusion. The platypus doesn't make sense in any way it's investigated. It has a mixture of properties, both in its body features and in its DNA. This means the evidence should falsify evolution. However, when shared ancestors aren't the answer, an alternative explanation is inserted to catch the problem. That means that multiple pathways lead to the same answer. A theory is confirmed. In a lot of papers, evolutionary theory is hailed for its extreme explanatory power. We have seen more examples of this. Evolutionary theory predicted pretty people to be more fertile. When research showed that this wasn't the case, the result was explained by evolutionary theory. This is not evidence for a good theory. This is actually bad science. Because when all paths lead to the confirmation of the theory is unfalsifiable. Is evolution observable? Only evolution that happens today. The majority were unique events that supposed to have happened millions of years ago, spread out over millions of years. We can absolutely not observe that. Is it repeatable? Have we evolved a trilobite in the laboratory? Can we make Tiktaalik walk? Can we give a dinosaur feathers? Can we evolve cows into whales? We can't. It isn't repeatable. Experiments show fruit flies evolved into fruit flies, no matter what we expose it to. Is evolutionary theory based on physical laws? This is the evidence that life can form from non-life. Actually, there isn't the slightest piece of evidence that that is possible. According to the theory, all inventions in biology evolved. So they are uninvented. They just happen to grow there because of natural selection. However, when multiple dependencies are needed to be met before it works, natural selection cannot do it. We observe today that inventions can only come from intelligent design. Chaos cannot form information by chance. Our DNA consists of as much as an encyclopedia of information. So actually, evolutionary theory violates quite a lot of physical laws. Evolutionary theory has all the properties to consider it pseudoscience. So when we put evolution and creation side by side, they are in the same position. One of these issues can actually be fixed: the presupposition. When you have a murder investigation and there are two suspects, you will have a presupposition if you consider only one of them a suspect. If you try to avoid that by considering the other one the only suspect, that would be a presupposition as well. How to fix this is rather easy. Consider both, then neither of them is a presupposition. Let's see what happens to the rest of this list in that case. Both, if they would have happened, would still be a unique event. Both are unfalsifiable. Neither of them can really be observed, because it happened in the past. We'll get back to the repeatability issue. Both of them, if they would have happened, would indeed violate known physical laws. We can just conclude that that somehow has happened. Now for the repeatability. The platypus doesn't make sense to evolution. It has a mixture of properties from a large variety of other species that cannot be all from a common ancestor. The same applies for its DNA. However, properties returning in different machines or inventions are common in created objects. The wheel in a wheelbarrow and the car are very similar, but they don't have a shared ancestor. It's just that the design of the wheel makes sense in both objects. If creatures would be created, then their shared properties make sense. One could object to this conclusion because theoretically everything can be created. But that's not really an argument. Not everything would be created. There are objects that are clearly not created, simply because they don't have any properties of an invention, and we know of possible physical laws of how they came to be. Other objects are clearly created, which we can see, even if we don't see them being created, and even when we don't know who made it. Life consists entirely of stuff like that. The objects can only originate from creation by somebody intelligent enough. No natural process can invent a hinge, and that is one of the simplest things we see in life forms. The conclusion isn't drawn from ignorance. Observations just show inventions are created. They cannot be not created. Experiments show it's impossible that single cells evolve into human beings. It's even impossible to evolve a fruit fly into anything else than a fruit fly. Another issue is that of bad design. Those who point to bad design issues usually don't look deeply enough into the details of the object. When you put the specifications of the biological object next to the invention, you can see very often that the biological object outperforms our inventions. Even the evolution that we are supposed to see in the fossil record doesn't match the theory. The theory just says the eye kept on improving through time. Instead, we see the lowest geological layers contain creatures with complete eyes, and nowadays there are fish that are blind. They swim so deeply that their eyesight is no longer useful. But it is clearly visible where their ancestors used to have eyes. So the evolution of the eye is in reverse. It has not yet been possible to create life in a laboratory. Assume we would be able to do so in the future. What sentence would be more applicable? 1. Life can form naturally. 2. Life can be created. And that would be number 2. So creation may be repeatable. However, non-life evolving into life so far seems ever so much more impossible. Let's summarize it once more. Real fossil transitions are all missing. Evolutionary theory is unfalsifiable. The evidence shows large anomalies to the theory. Alternatives are not considered. Life consists of things we only observe to arise from creation, and there isn't the slightest piece of evidence that life can arise from non-life. We've reached the end of the series Evolution the Evidence. Thank you for watching and see you later.